Paul Newman, actually a famous actor. I think he died about 2-3 years ago. And he's a famous actor. I mean, when I was a kid, he was one of the biggest movie stars in all of Hollywood. And one of the things he did, he was very involved in a charitable giving. He had a camp he funded called the Hole in the Wall Gang that took care of kids with illnesses and cancer. He also gave it a variety of things. In fact, back when I my previous church in Chicago, about 20 years ago, there was a guy in a neighboring church who had a big illness and he needed a hospital. He didn't have any insurance, and the bill was going to be about $125,000. His church was raising money for him, and we had a spaghetti dinner to raise money, to help raise money. I think the church was raising about $20,000, and they were $100,000 short, and Paul Newman's foundation kicked in and paid the rest. Rather amazing. But I remember a story I heard about Paul Newman. He was at his camp called the Hole in the Wall Gang. And it was of all these kids with severe illnesses. And one night he came to this camp, and he wasn't at the camp too often. There's all these kids around a campfire at night. He came in, this older guy came and sat down around the kids. And one kid looked at Paul Newman and said, "Who are you?" Not the same era, but movie stars and all that. And Paul Newman didn't know what to say, but he saw Newman's own lemonade, a carton of lemonade off that they were drinking. He walked over to the lemonade, and it was his face. If you see Newman's own, it's always a picture of Paul Newman on the front. He brought the lemonade over to the kid and said, "That's me." And the kid looked at it and looked at his face and said, "Are you lost?" That's usually the reason they put people's faces on cartons of drinks and beverages always. But he wasn't lost. But that's really the topic of the sermon and this passage of Jesus teaching in the 15th chapter of Luke, talking about seeking and saving the lost. And it begins very simple with the Pharisees and the teachers of the law are looking at Jesus, and what are they complaining about Jesus today? They're saying, "Jesus, you're eating and hanging out with tax collectors and sinners." I always like that expression, sometimes it's sinners and tax collectors. It's tax collectors, the worst kind of sinners. But they're complaining that Jesus hung around with sinners and tax collectors. You know what's implied anytime you say that? Well, I'm certainly not one of them. I'm not a sinner. Certainly I'm not a tax collector. But I'm not a sinner. So Jesus begins, and he tells two short little parables. And the first parable is about a shepherd who has 100 sheep. I know nothing about sheep, farming or ranching or whatever you call it. I've never even been on a sheep ranch. I've been on cows and pigs and horses and all sorts of things. But this shepherd has 100 sheep, and he says, what happens if one of the sheep wanders off? Do you leave the flock and go after the one? And Jesus said, the shepherd's going to leave the flock, the 99 behind, and he's going to go after that one lost sheep. Because he cares about that sheep. And he's going to be all excited when he finds it, when he brings it back. I tried to think of something analogous from my life, and there's only one moment in my life I can remember I frantically losing somebody. We all lose keys or your wallet or your phone more often than anything, But the time I was most terrified of losing somebody was back when my kids were little. Luke and Grace, I think, were 3 and 4. And we went to Epcot one night. And Epcot, everybody watches the fireworks at the end of the day, and then you all leave, you go out, everybody's funneled out, it's thousands of people shooting through that little entrance into the park. And I remember my wife had Luke, or Grace, and I had Luke, and I lost him in the midst of the crowd and people going around him. And I think Luke was 4. And I started looking frantically. I started sprinting around, and it's hard to sprint around with all this flow of thousands of people pouring out. I think it took me about 3 to 5 minutes, but that was a terrible 3 to 5 minutes. I finally found Luke, and then for the next several years I had hung on to him a little bit tight, But Jesus. You know, that moment reminds me of this passage made me think of that. You know, when you lose someone, you go after them. Your heart starts racing. And Jesus in this passage is trying to teach and show the Pharisees and the teachers of the law is that, you know what, one person is of crucial importance. It matters everything. You put everything you have into finding that one. Because you care. The second story he told was about a woman, and what does she have? 10 silver coins. And they're pretty valuable. What happens if one falls and you don't know where it goes? You know, coins can roll. They can roll in the crevices. What do? You light the lamp and you crawl around on your hands and knees and you try to find that one lost coin. Because it's valuable. You know, the story that popped in my head, I remember reading an account about Yo-Yo Ma. I like that name, Yo-Yo Ma. Do you know who Yo-Yo Ma is? He's a cello player. Best cello player in the world. And this is something that happened to him back in New York City years ago. He was playing a concert at Carnegie Hall. It went great. It was late night. You know, people were celebrating. He went back to his hotel. He takes his cello with him. It's sort of two of a kind. The other one's in a museum in Europe. It was built in 1770 in Vienna, custom made. It's worth about $2.5 million. But the next morning he got up and had to go into some rehearsals. He put his cello in the trunk of a cab in New York City and drove to the rehearsal place, got out, paid the cabbie, and then went inside, and he forgot his cello in the trunk of the cab. $2.5 million cello. He called the cab company frantic and said, "I left my cello in your cab." And they said, "Okay, do you know the cab number?" "No." "Do you know the cab driver's name?" Nobody spoke with a foreign accent. If you know New York City, that's probably 75% of the cab drivers. And then, you know what, it did come out because very few people put stuff in the trunk in New York City. It was about 5 hours later, the cabbie opened the trunk and looked, "Oh, we got this cello." And he called it in. But for 5 hours, he was frantic, looking for a $2.5 million cello, wondering what's happening to it. I can imagine a little bit of anxiety, his stomach curdling and moving inside. But then he finally got it back. Jesus tells both of these parables to try to give the Pharisees and the teachers of the law is the fact that, you know what, God cares about everything. He says there's rejoicing in the angels of heaven when one sinner comes home. Do you know, I always have the picture, one of the more famous pictures of Jesus. There's different ones that stand out. Have you ever seen a picture of Jesus carrying a little lamb, you know, hanging over his neck with the legs, and Jesus grabbing hold of the legs and walking, carrying a little lamb? As I read this passage, I think of that picture in my mind of Jesus carrying a little lamb home, or a child home. And that's what the church, the people of Jesus, are called to be about. Caring people, sharing Jesus with the world and all they do. Do you know, this morning, one of the special things we install our teachers. And teachers, you do a lot of things. You do math. Some of you do math. I guess in your middle school, if you're social studies or English, you don't have to do much math. But you do the twos. That's, I like that little children's sermon, the numbers keep getting bigger. And, as problems get harder. But you share not only knowledge of math or English or all that, you get the chance to share the grace and the person of Jesus with children. How he's ready to forgive. How he goes after the lost. He leaves the 99 behind because, you know what? He cares about the lost. picking them up and bringing them home. The remarkable thing about this passage and all this thing is Jesus wants to remind us that, you know what, we're all sinners. When he talks about, the problem he had with the Pharisees, they looked at other people and they said, well, we're not certainly sinners. You know what? The truth of the matter is we're all sinners. We all need that incredible grace and the forgiveness of the cross. We would be lost without it. The challenge that we have as a church, as a school, as all the people of God, is sharing the grace of Jesus. Sometimes it's hard. I remember an account I read from the French Revolution. Some wars are bloody and some wars are really, really, really bloody. And the French Revolution, you know what it made famous? The guillotine. And you think about a war, and that's what it produced, for society. That's pretty bloody and pretty messy. And I remember reading a story about one general in the French Revolution, and things had just gotten out of hand, and he was fed up and sick with all the needless violence and killing that was going on. And they arrested one of the enemy, and the men said, let's kill him right now. And the general said, hold on. Let's slow down a little bit. And the men said, let's kill him right now. Let's think of a new way. Bloodier and gorier. The general thought about what they were doing and said, all right. But let's first pray together the Lord's Prayer. And the men said, oh, all right, we'll do it. So they start praying, Our Father, who art in heaven. And they go through the prayer. And they come to the petition where he said, forgive us our sins, as we forgive those who sin against us. And when they said those words, the soldiers' voices calmed down. They finished the prayer, and you could have heard a pin drop. The general looked at his men and he said, are you ready to kill him now? He said, now. Maybe we'll work something out. They thought about forgiveness from the perspective of Jesus. They saw somebody else who they saw as a sinner, a tax collector, even worse, the enemy. Saw that Jesus cared about them, just like he cares about them. That's the way that the church has been powerful. Not with might, but with the cross. A sense of being ready to forgive, to forget, and to share the incredible blessings that God